The Mysteries and Histories and Brief History of Castel Sant'Angelo Part 1. Subscribed by my YouTube channel, Golden Words. Introduction of the Castel Sant'Angelo. This magnificent fortress is one of the most popular, fascinating, and mysterious places in the Italian capital. With a glance at its history, it's possible to discover the secrets of an extraordinary and somewhat macabre Rome. Castel Sant'Angelo, also known as the Mausoleum of Hadrian or the Castle of the Holy Angel, is a monument located on the right bank of the Tiber. You can reach the castle by crossing the famous Ponte Sant'Angelo. The monument is located within a short distance of the Vatican, between the Borgo and Prati districts, and is connected to Vatican City by a fortified escape route called Passetto di Borgo. When visiting Castel Sant'Angelo, you can explore the ancient dungeons and prisons, attend music and entertainment performances, climb to the castle's highest point, and enjoy a beautiful view of the city. Brief history. The castle attracts more than 1 million visitors each year. The circular structure is surrounded by massive walls and stands 48 meters above the ground. A visit to this place is an exciting journey through time dating from 2,000 years ago to the present. The building, which we know today as a world-famous museum, previously had the function of a monumental tomb, fortress, prison, private residence, and military headquarters. Imperial period, 27 BC, 476 AD. The Great Mausoleum of Hadrian was built between 123 and 139 AD under the direction of the architect Decrianus. It was inspired by the Mausoleum of Augustus but with larger dimensions. To connect the building to Campus Martius on the other side of the Tiber, the Pons Aelius, now called the St. Angelo Bridge or Bridge of Angels, was opened in 134. The original mausoleum consisted of a square space 83 meters wide and 15 meters high. It was lined with marble on the outside, and the frieze was decorated with ox heads, bucrania, and festoons, also called garlands. On top of this was a cylindrical building with a diameter of 64 m and a height of 21 m. Above the cylinder was a tower with 3 burial chambers, which has now been incorporated into the newer parts of the building. After Hadrian's death, his successor Antoninus Pius continued the work, and the mausoleum eventually became the final resting place of several emperors and their families. At the top, where the statue of the Archangel now stands, there was probably a bronze statue of Emperor Hadrian as a sun god pulled by a quadriga. The perimeter of the monument was surrounded by statues, the remains of which have been preserved to this day. The most intact of these is the famous Barberini faun. There was also a wall around the perimeter with a bronze gate decorated with peacocks. Medieval era, 476 to 1492. In 403 AD, after the numerous incursions of barbarians and looters into the city, the mausoleum started to be used as a fortress. By order of the Western Emperor Honorius, it was connected to the Aurelian walls to become part of the city's defense system. Thus, the fortress protected the Vatican from the plundering by the Vandals of Genseric in 455. The Romans then decided to counterattack with literally everything at their disposal. Even the aforementioned statue, the Barberini faun, was thrown at the enemies. In the early 6th century, the building was used by Theodoric as a state prison. It's said that the castle received its current name in 590. At that time, the city was hit by the plague, until one day something miraculous happened. According to legend, Pope Gregory I saw in a vision how Archangel Michael on top of the castle slipped his sword back into its sheath as a sign that the epidemic had ended. More details on the origin of the castle's name can be found later in this article. Later in this period, many families competed for ownership of the castle, including the senator Theophylactus and his family, who also used it as a prison, and the Crescenzi family, who fortified the castle and named it Castrum Crescentii. In 1277, Pope Orsini Niccolò III ordered the construction of the Passetto di Borgo, an escape route connecting the Apostolic Palace in Vatican City with Castel Sant'Angelo. He also decided to partially transfer the Holy See there. Later the castle came into the hands of the Pierleoni and Orsini families, who ceded it to the church in 1365. In 1367, the keys to the building were handed over to Pope Urban V. From that moment on, especially after its destruction by a French garrison, Castel Sant'Angelo linked its fate to that of the popes. Because of its fortified structure, the popes used it as a refuge in times of danger, to house the Vatican archives and treasury, as a court, and as a prison. After the reconstruction commissioned by Pope Boniface IX in 1395, the castle regained its former function. The Pope commissioned the military architect Niccolò Lamberti to carry out several works to strengthen the defensive structure of the castle. The shape of the entrance to the building was redefined and the chapel dedicated to Archangel Michael was rebuilt. Renaissance, 1492 to 1789. Throughout the 16th century, the castle's defenses were improved and the halls were decorated more and more beautifully. Architect Antonio da Sangallo the Younger, known from St. Peter's Basilica, was partly responsible for this. It seems that Pope Alexander VI had a new part built, transforming the castle into a place for banquets and performances, which was demolished by Pope Urban VIII in 1628. Remarkably, the part in question was painted by the famous Pinturicchio. However, it was the fortification works of Pope Alexander VI that enabled Pope Clement VII to withstand the siege of the famous Landsknecht for 7 months. Examples were the construction of 4 pentagonal bastions, dedicated to the evangelists, and the moat dug around the walls filled with the water of the Tiber. On May 6, 1527, the army of 25,000 German and Spanish soldiers led by Charles V took over the city. During the sack of Rome, nothing or no one was safe. Destruction, robbery, rape, and murder took place. In addition, a new plague epidemic broke out. In the end, 20,000 citizens were killed, 10,000 fled and 30,000 died from the plague brought by the invaders. However, a small part of the population at the time, of the 50 to 60,000 in total, and Pope Clement VII himself were able to reach the Castel Sant'Angelo for shelter via the Passetto di Borgo. On June 7, 1527, the Pope surrendered and was forced to open the fortress to the enemy. In 1530 he was obliged to crown Charles V as emperor. Between 1667 and 1669, after further renovations, Clement IX had the 10 famous marble angels placed on the Pons Aelius. Since then, it has also been called the Sant'Angelo Bridge. In the 19th century, the castle was used exclusively as a political prison and was known as Fort Sant'Angelo. Contemporary age, 1789, present. During the Napoleonic era, when Rome was occupied by the Revolutionary Army, Pius VI Broschi, 1775 to 1799, was forced into a humiliating exile and the garrison stationed in the castle surrendered. The powder magazines were handed over, the documents of the Vatican Apostolic Archives were sealed with the papal coat of arms, and the papal banner was replaced with the French tricolor. Even the bronze statue of the Archangel was painted in the 3 French national colors, was proclaimed the genius of the liberation of France, and a red Phrygian cap was placed on his head. All the papal coats of arms affixed to the walls of the fortress and the ramparts, as a reminder of the work done over the centuries, were removed. When French troops withdrew from Rome in October 1799, the flag of the Kingdom of Naples was placed on the fortress. It remained there until the castle was returned to the army of Pope Pius VII, 1800 to 1823. Upon their departure from Castel Sant'Angelo, the Bourbon soldiers emptied the storerooms, took artillery and ammunition, furniture and upholstery, and even removed the glass from the windows, the doors, and water pipes. All that remained of the castle was the prison and a base for the troops to defend it. After the creation of the Kingdom of Italy in 1861, the fortress was initially used as a barracks, then converted into a museum. The castle has seen a succession of different restoration works. Those of 1886 to 1887, for example, were necessary for the construction of the new banks of the Tiber and were entrusted to 2 officers of the Genio Militare, Mariano Borgatti, and Enrico Rocchi. The major renovations in Castel Sant'Angelo and its surroundings continued through the early 20th century. Until 1911, when the World Exhibition dedicated to art and culture was held in Rome. Between 1914 and 1915, the process of demilitarization of the castle was completed, with the castle being definitively assigned to the Ministry of Education, while only the surrounding area remained with the Ministry of War. During World War I, works of art from the war zones were stored in the fortress, including bronze horses from the Basilica of San Marco in Venice. In the years between the wars, the idea of isolating the majesty of the castle in the city gardens prevailed. The result was the demolition of all the structures that had been built in the area over the centuries and the destruction of even more historical documents about the complex history of the fortress. The building's long and varied history, with its countless transformations, seems to have nestled in the intricate labyrinth of underground corridors, dwellings, loggias, staircases, and courtyards that make up the castle's current layout. Today, it's a multifaceted and complex structure, full of symbolic values and historical layers. In 2019, the museum was visited by 1.2 million people, ranking it among the top 5 most visited museums in Italy. Fortress of the Angels, The Mysteries and Histories of Castel Sant'Angelo. Walking along the Tiber at night, the idle wanderer will inevitably come across a miraculous sight as they follow along the river's bend. A team of heavenly angels, their gleaming white forms shining in the dark, spans the waters between the city center and the Vatican. At their end stands a massive hulk of brick and stone, high atop which looms their captain, the Archangel Michael, his outstretched wings illuminated against the night sky. This is the Castle of the Holy Angel, better known as Castel Sant'Angelo. An ancient imperial tomb turned papal fortress, the site is very much worth visiting during the day, but after dark one's imagination can really glimpse the surreal beauty of its 19 centuries of history. Seeing Castel Sant'Angelo at night, one can almost sense the ghosts of the Roman emperors buried here and the cries of the thousands of papal prisoners who languished in its dungeons. The Archangel and the Plague, the Castel Sant'Angelo statue and its legend. The fortress takes its name from an old legend dating to the worst days of the Dark Ages. At the end of the 6th century AD, after Rome's fall but still centuries before its Renaissance rebirth, a terrible plague fell upon the city. With thousands falling ill and the bodies of the dead choking the streets, Pope Gregory the Great led a procession through the city, praying to God to spare those who still lived. Looking up to the old mausoleum of Emperor Hadrian, long fallen into disuse and ruin, Pope Gregory had a vision of a radiant figure high atop the massive tomb. It was an angel, glowing brightly and brandishing a sword. As the Pope watched, the angel lowered his weapon and returned it to its sheath. The meaning was clear: the plague was over and God's wrath had been put to rest. Today the statue on top of Castel Sant'Angelo commemorates this story. The current bronze version dates from the 1700s, but replaces an older version, in marble, that stood in the same spot. The sculpture of the Archangel Michael serves as a reminder to the inhabitants of this Catholic capital that God's mercy is present even when things look their worst. Hadrian's Mausoleum, the burials of Castel Sant'Angelo. Long before space was controlled by the Church, however, it was a major monument honoring the pagan emperors of Rome. Hadrian, one of the greatest rulers of High Empire, built an immense cylindrical sepulchre designed, in form and scale, to rival that of his illustrious predecessor Augustus. Hadrian's major innovation was that rather than walking straight into the main burial chamber, the visitor ascends a massive winding ramp that coils within the huge concrete tomb. Even today, in order to reach the modern castle, you need to walk through the ancient mausoleum. Entering first into a massive antechamber, once covered in precious marble, you can see the niche where a colossal statue of Hadrian once stood. From there, you start walking up the giant ramp. As you go deeper into this huge mountain of brick and cement, it feels like a descent into the underworld even if technically you're walking uphill. Finally, you reach the heart of the structure, the emperor's burial chamber itself. While nothing remains of its rich decoration, you can still see the spaces reserved for the sarcophagi of the imperial family. Remarkably, only one piece remains, the purple porphyry lid of a sarcophagus, perhaps Hadrian's own, has been flipped upside down and serves as the baptismal font of St. Peter's Basilica. Learn more about our Vatican tours. Burials in Castel Sant'Angelo, after Hadrian himself, continued for most of the High Empire. Successive emperors and their wives were interred here, including Marcus Aurelius and the notorious Caracalla. Scholars still debate, however, how all of these sarcophagi could have possibly been arranged in the single known tomb chamber. Perhaps, like the pyramids of Egypt, other sealed rooms are still waiting to be found. From monument to battlement, the later history of Castel Sant'Angelo. The urban history of Rome is a history of reuse, with the medieval and Renaissance citizens making use of what the ancients left behind. As an artificial mountain with sheer walls exceeding 160 feet, Hadrian's mausoleum was a natural point of defense. The emperor had placed his mausoleum on the bend in the river to maximize its visibility. For a papacy under attack, it was the perfect place for a fortress. The transformation of the tomb into a castle was a gradual process. Much of the fortifications were finalized under Pope Alexander VI, but interior decorations continued under later popes, including Leo X, who commissioned Michelangelo to design the facade of an interior courtyard. Indeed, by the late 16th century the interior resembled more of a palace than a castle. During the summer the Pope would stay here to enjoy the cool breezes off the river. Despite all this ornament, the castle kept its military function and remained the final refuge of the papacy. Its most famous defense was an old trick from the Middle Ages. The so-called Passetto di Borgo is a concealed passageway that runs from the Vatican to Castel Sant'Angelo. In 1527, when Rome was being sacked, nearly the entire battalion of Swiss guards was massacred, but Pope Clement VII made his escape through the secret passageway of Castel Sant'Angelo. A panoramic view with and operatic history. Having ascended through an ancient tomb, medieval fortifications and palatial Renaissance rooms, the pinnacle of Castel Sant'Angelo is an even greater delight. Just below the famous angel statue, the top of the castle is a large terrace with a panorama over the entire city. The view from the top of Castel Sant'Angelo is one of the most dramatic in Rome. As the city unfolds around you, you can make out all the important buildings of the historic center. Those with sharp eyes will be able to make out the top of the Spanish Steps to the northeast and the Colosseum to the southeast. Toward the other side, the top of Castel Sant'Angelo offers the city's best view of St. Peter's Basilica. Yet, while the view from Castel Sant'Angelo is reason enough to come up here, it's also an important spot for opera buffs. On stages around the world, this exact terrace, angel and all, is recreated for Act 3 of Puccini's opera Tosca. It is here that the titular heroine, overwhelmed by the death of her lover, throws herself over the battlements to escape capture by her enemies. Looking out over the city, one can easily understand why Puccini chose to stage his emotional climax at this breathtaking site. Castel Sant'Angelo. Castel Sant'Angelo is not your average castle, in both appearance and in its complex and fascinating history. The castle is officially named the Mausoleum of Hadrian and was built between 134–139 AD for the sole purpose as serving as the final resting place for the Roman Emperor Hadrian and his family. For the first few hundred years of its existence, Castel Sant'Angelo fulfilled its duties as a mausoleum, and the remains of many succeeding emperors were also buried within the castle grounds. However, in 401 AD the building was converted into a military fortress to help strengthen Rome's defenses against enemy territories. Because of this, it endured a multitude of attacks, and many of its original statues and decorations, including the funerary urns containing the emperors, were lost or destroyed. Interestingly, the castle took its present name well before it was actually turned into a castle. In 590 AD, a great plague swept through Rome, devastating the city. Legend says that when this epidemic was drawing to an end, the archangel Michael appeared on top of the castle. Pope Gregory I took this as a sign, and renamed the building Castel Sant'Angelo, the Castle of the Holy Angel. Today, a bronze statue of the angel stands in the apparition's place. Much later, in the 14th century, the popes took charge and began converting the castle into, well, an actual castle. The castle was intended to be used as a refuge for the pope if needed. In fact, one of the most interesting additions was the 800-m-long Passetto di Borgo in 1277, an elevated passageway that links the castle to the Vatican City. In at least 2 instances, it was used to carry popes to safety when the city was under attack. While the papal state had control of Castel Sant'Angelo, it served as a castle, a fortress and even a prison. Talk about a multifunction building. Many famous Italians were imprisoned within the castle walls, and executions were also performed in the castle courtyard. So, while it's a place that has served many people well, these castle walls have seen an awful lot of bloodshed too.